I just want to let you know that this is a very, very, very special film. It will move you and it will leave you with a lot of questions. And we're really, really lucky that we have the filmmaker, co-director David Felix Sutcliffe. He's on Skype with us. So please stay after the screening. And on your way out, please make sure you make a donation to Cinema Politica. Cinema Politica deserves your donations. It deserves your support. Spread the word. And please try to make it out every Monday night. Thank you and enjoy your film.
Yeah, well, in terms of permission, well, we knew that obviously the FBI would never give us permission, so we never asked for it. But we did make sure to consult with attorneys beforehand to make sure that we wouldn't get arrested for making this film. We had access to this informant. My co-director, Lyric R. Cabral, she knew the informant for many, many years. And he agreed to let us document this investigation. And so we wanted to make sure that we wouldn't get in trouble, and we talked to lawyers, and they said this is an incredible opportunity, but there's certain parameters you have to follow to make sure that you won't jeopardize yourselves or tamper. Put yourselves in a position where you could be accused of tampering with a federal investigation. And one of those parameters was to not contact the target of the investigation using information from the informant. So even though we knew who Khalifa was from a very early point, we'd also been warned against communicating with him. However, when Khalifa started to post on Facebook his suspicions that he was being set up by the FBI, ultimately inviting journalists to talk to him, we talked to our lawyers again, and they said, that's a clear invitation, and I think that you should be fine. However, make sure you don't tell Khalifa about your relationship with Saeed. Otherwise, that could also upset the balance of the investigation, or you could be accused of upsetting the balance. So as long as we followed those kind of parameters, then they said we would be protected. So that's how that was what kind of laid the groundwork for us making this film. We've seen that the use of informants has been almost exclusively limited to Muslim communities. Even though the New America Foundation released a report this past summer saying that white extremists have actually killed twice as many Americans as Muslim extremists, I do not know of a single example of informants being sent into right-wing extremist communities to kind of create these same types of plots. And I think that's there's this misperception that that the greatest threat that Americans face is coming from Islamic communities or Islamic extremists. And yet the evidence shows that's absolutely not the case. But yet it's too easy and for politicians to demonize and vilify Muslims and Muslim communities, and it'd be much more difficult to try to use these same tactics against white Americans. I think most white Americans would be up in arms. They'd be outraged if they saw these types of tactics being used against other white Americans. And yet, when it comes to Muslim defendants and Muslim targets, they're more than happy to overlook the details. And journalists as well, mainstream media is also complicit in perpetuating this cycle. As you can see from the film, the reporter in Pittsburgh is not exactly taking the time to parse through the details. And that just kind of perpetuates this problem and kind of creates a scenario in which we continue to spend $1 trillion a year on national security, on homeland security programs, except that those funds are being targeted or being used to devastating effect, primarily against Muslim communities. Yeah, I mean, we were incredibly curious about Khalifa. Who is this person? What is he like? But we had also, my co-director Lyric and I, we had both been exploring these cases for almost 10 years. And so we knew that although, many of these people kind of posture on social media, kind of, or even it's not so much posturing. Some of it is, legitimate criticisms of the American government. Like why is there this obsessive fixation on the people who were killed as a result of the attacks of 9/11, and yet there's absolutely no sympathy or no attention paid to the victims, the hundreds of thousands of people who have died as a result of the U.S. invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. But that said, when we finally did meet Khalifa, I think we were nervous about kind of entering into that space. We really didn't know what to expect. Saeed had given us, pretty ample. He basically said, this guy's a punk. He's not someone that we should be scared of. At that same time, we didn't know, like, would we like this person? And Khalifa is actually a pretty charming person. He has views that we radically disagree with, but at the same time, he's the person who managed to figure out, had the wherewithal to at least like Google the phone number, which was something I don't think I would have personally thought of, but yet he was able to apply his that savviness to protect himself. Unfortunately, it didn't make a difference. The government had that card in their back pocket, and they used it against him. So it's hard for me to kind of really to travel back and try to trace like what my perceptions of Khalifa were at different points, because at this point, it's kind of deafened by sympathy. I have such pity for him and his family, and that's kind of one thing that I hold on to right now that I think mostly about. Yeah, I think he's been kind of keeping little newspaper clippings of his cases that he's worked on over the past, 20 years. And in those newspaper clippings, he highlights all the points where it says unidentified informant. He's been a part of these pretty elaborate cases, which federal agents have used to climb up the ladders of their various, bureaucracies and institutions where they work. And yet Saeed is tossed out onto the curb. And doesn't even have a story to tell. So he's looking for acknowledgement of what he's done, I think. And also he wants a book deal. He's still, financial motivation is definitely a strong motivator for him in participating in this project, hoping that this story will attract attention and someone will approach him and pay him money to tell his story. But I think he also wanted to explain himself to the Muslim community that ostracized him, that he's been excommunicated from. He's not asking for forgiveness. He's not offering an apology. But I think he wants them to know what happened, because in 2007 he testified on the stand, but he wasn't able to kind of give as much detail as he may have wanted to give, and that's, I think, what he wanted to put forth here. In 2005, from 2003 to 2005, Saeed was actually working two different cases. One of them was the Tariq Shah case, and then the other case he was working on was an investigation of a supposed financier of bin Laden. And during that time, he was making $40,000 to $50,000 a month. This for a limited period of time, but he said he earned several hundred thousands of dollars. He earned a lot of money. He blew it all. But then when he testified in 2007, and his identity was exposed, I think his value as an informant kind of evaporated. And actually, between the time of 2007 and 2011, when we first started filming with him, he hadn't really been offered any substantive cases. I think part of that was because, the FBI originally wanted Saeed because he was connected to the New York Muslim community. They said, we can use you to get in and to meet other people that we want to know more about. And we can use that as, you have a reputation, and we could use that to send you overseas and introduce you to other people that we want to know more about and that we want to, entrap. And, with his identity exposed, he no longer has that value as a resource. They can send him to Pittsburgh to talk to this, to a convert who doesn't really have much connection to the broader Muslim community, and they're hoping, I'm guessing, that Khalifa is never going to talk to anybody who goes to New York, or that they weren't going to find out about Saeed that way. So yeah, I think Khalifa's a low-level target. They weren't going to pay him. Plus, Pittsburgh doesn't have quite the same budget that New York does. And Saeed talked about that frequently, how the Pittsburgh office, is, incredibly incompetent compared to the New York office, and plus they just don't have the money that he was, that New York has. In terms of Tariq Shah, the full kind of what happened there was Tariq Shah was behind on his child support. His license had been suspended. His passport, I think, had also been kind of suspended. And it was difficult for him to travel around to perform. He's a jazz musician, and he's not able to drive to gigs. He wasn't able to travel overseas. And at one point, he got pulled over driving with a suspended license, and they arrested him. And the only person he knew to call who could potentially bail him out was Saeed. So Saeed, using government money, went and bailed him out. And after that, Tariq said, I'm desperate. That's the moment that was referenced in the film. I'm desperate. I'll do anything. I'm so frustrated. Saeed said to him, he said, I pitched him like a travel agent. I said, I know some people who would be willing to pay you. You're a martial arts expert. They'd be willing to pay you for your expertise as a martial artist. Plus, you can travel around the world and meet people and see different places and to support our brothers who are being attacked and slaughtered in Afghanistan. And so at that point, that's when the gears began turning. And they wanted Tariq to make a video that they could use, like a martial arts video, training other jihadist fighters in hand-to-hand combat. Tariq never even made the video. They spent a year kind of deliberating over this. And yet, at the end of the day, Tariq, kind of last minute, they had an undercover agent pose as an al-Qaeda recruiter. They got Tariq to recite an oath of allegiance to al-Qaeda, saying, well, we need to do this first in order to even be, to talk to the big guys and to really kind of take the next steps in terms of, making money. So he said, okay, I'll do that. And that's when they kind of swooped in and said, that's all we need in order to charge you with material support for terrorism. It was complicated in the beginning. We were incredibly nervous about, communicating via email about this project. A lot of times we would request, in-person meetings, but at the same time, at the onset of this project, I have one credit under my belt. I made an hour-long film for PBS, and Lyric, it was our first film. So we're two first-timers trying to kind of convince Sundance and Tribeca and these various other entities to have kind of in-person meetings with us. And I think at the first pass, a lot of people didn't know whether to take us seriously, didn't know whether this was a conspiracy theory, whether it was legitimate. But slowly over time, as they began to see work samples, we just bit the bullet. We're like, we're going to have to email these people our treatments. We're going to have to email them as well and upload video samples, which all of that made us incredibly nervous. But really, at the end of the day, you see so many things slipping through the cracks. And the one thing that kind of shocked us the most was that we were present for Khalifa's arrest. We had been in communication with them before that, so we knew that they knew who we were. We knew that they were monitoring Khalifa's communications, and yet they never did the basic kind of check to see who else we were in contact with. And they would have found out very quickly that the other person on our call records was their informant. And when they didn't catch that, and when we were able to continue filming with Saeed, not just for a few weeks or a few months, but literally for years after that, we started to feel a bit more secure in reaching out and emailing and discussing the project. Keeping specific information like Saeed's name. We changed names within our applications. But also at the same time, Filmmaker Magazine selected us for a list of 25 new faces of independent film. And there was an article about us and the fact that we were making a film about an active counterterrorism investigation. And at that point, we couldn't say no to the press and the attention, because that would help us raise resources in order to finish the film. Although we said, at some point they're going to figure things out and they're going to come knocking on our door. That never ever happened. And as far as we know, they had no idea that we were making this film until we emailed them asking for comment, and they never responded to comment. Yeah, in terms of Khalifa, we wish that this film could be used to change his current situation, but the gun charge is the gun charge, the photograph is the photograph, and there's nothing our material or footage or anything we possess nothing can contest that, nothing can erase the existence of that photograph, and we're hopeful that the film can be used as part of a civil lawsuit on his behalf, and he's talking to the Muslim Legal Fund of America. We're trying to help facilitate that conversation, and also to see if to help him reunite with his family once he is released, because it's not certain that they'll be able to reunite. He won't be able to travel overseas. We don't know if she'll be able to travel back to America. So that's still kind of open-ended at this point. And in terms of Saeed, the potential legal fallout for him, that was something we were concerned about as well. But there had been enough cases of other informants coming forward to disclose their relationships with the FBI, to talk about them. There's a This American Life episode in which an informant gave, some really pretty incredible, details of his relationship with the FBI and his work on a case in California. And this is the first time an active informant has kind of communicated with reporters and journalists and filmmakers. But the precedent at that point had been set to indicate that the FBI was unwilling to prosecute or pursue these informants. Because I think if they were to go that route, they would have to take this into a trial, and there would have to be all this kind of damning evidence presented within a public space, which I think they absolutely want to avoid. Saeed has no contract with the FBI. They pay him in cash. I think they want to keep this relationship as off the books as possible. Why are they doing this? I think, after 9/11, there was an understandable response. We have to do whatever it takes to prevent this from happening again. Unfortunately, the machine that was created in response and the momentum it has gained has never been substantively challenged or evaluated. And there's, too many political players and too many private players who are making, who are benefiting greatly off of, I think what people are referring to now as a terrorism industrial complex. We're spending $1 trillion a year on homeland security. There's a lot of people with a vested interest in making sure that America feels scared for as long as possible, so that we can continue to subcontract out, surveillance companies, security companies. There's, just a vast network of people who want this fear to stay in place. And every year, the FBI director goes before Congress and says the threat is greater than ever. It's never been as great as it is now. They say this every year. Same thing on the 4th of July, before the 4th of July weekend. They come forward and they say we have to send the alert level up to red. And yet there's never been any sort of substantive evidence to explain why every year they kind of jack it up just because it's the 4th of July. And in terms of informants, that's a huge issue that the Muslim communities had to deal with. That if there's Ramzi Qasem, who works with an organization in New York, helping to protect people who are approached by the FBI, Muslim individuals and community members who are approached by the FBI. He says that for the FBI, young Muslim men are either potential targets or informants. That if you're not going to give us information, if you're not willing to work for us to collect license plates and names and information and communicate and try to kind of test the seed, plant seeds within your community, within the mosque, then we're going to turn on you, and we're going to either, if we can, bring charges against you or accuse you of supporting terrorism. And it's one of the reasons that we wanted to avoid as much as possible vilifying Saeed. We wanted to create an empathetic portrait of this person who is ultimately, he's made decisions which have been misguided and unfortunate, but it's part of a government program, and that we want to be clear about who we perceive as the real villain in this situation. The FBI, I don't want to reduce them to this monolithic, supervillain status, but the ultimate human consequences of their work and of these energies and these programs has been catastrophic. I made a film previously about a young Muslim woman, a 16-year-old Muslim woman who was arrested by the FBI and accused of being a potential suicide bomber, and the long-lasting devastation that had on her and her family. Her father was deported, she was almost deported, her siblings were ripped apart, and some of them were placed into foster care. That there's a lot of invisible damage that happens here in these cases. So in terms of what my relationship with the FBI is, I would say it's an incredibly unfavorable and unpleasant one. Fortunately, I've yet to be approached. I have not been targeted, and I recognize, that's very much, a result, of my white male privilege status, and so I want to apply that privilege and try to use it to respond to this machine in a way that has some sort of meaningful impact for those communities. I think one of the most difficult experiences I've had in talking about this film is that things are immediately polarized. You either recognize that terrorism is a threat or you don't, and that's absurd to me to think that there's no in between space on that spectrum. And I never once in any of my interviews or conversations about the film have I ever said that terrorism is not a threat and that this is all being imagined. That there absolutely is a threat against America. I think the proportionate amount of resources and energy that is spent protecting Americans from that threat is what has gone wrong. And I think I think Khalifa is a legitimate target for investigation. I think the kinds of things that he was saying online, I think, warrant a closer look. And yet, meanwhile, you have so many people expressing that same level of violent anger and rage and hatred, but they just happen to be white men instead of Muslim men. And it's not one of these scenarios where I think that we should only be looking at these group of people and not looking at these people. I think that there should be a democratic evaluation of what threats our society is facing, and a proportionate, reasonable, rational response to those threats. Before 9/11, these same threats existed. They've become magnified and concentrated, and they've definitely increased as a consequence of the political climate that's emerged as a response to 9/11. But I think that we can't pick sides and say that we are either all for it or we're completely for it or completely against it in terms of what do we do to prevent future attacks. Of course, we need to be looking at where potential attacks may be coming from. And if people are putting up websites that are promoting vicious and disgusting ideas, that's one thing. It's one thing that I completely disagree with, but free speech is an important aspect of our society. It's just we have to evaluate when do those ideas and when does that momentum approach a point in which human lives are in danger. And I think that boundary, at least in the context of the American response to terrorism, the American domestic war on terror, that there's been no kind of sane effort to acknowledge that line, and that the fact that it's in many of these cases is so far off, and instead they're trying to figure out how can they push people towards that line and across it. Yeah, the ACLU was incredibly supportive. Specifically Ben Weisner. He's now representing Edward Snowden, and he was our principal advisor in the beginning of this film. But as an organization, I think the ACLU is not at the point where they're willing or able to specifically target the use of informants. I think they're really looking at the broader Muslim community and the ways in which Muslim Americans have been unjustly profiled and have paid the price for American paranoia. And I think that's what they're putting their energies into, focusing on that for the time being. Another organization, the Center for Constitutional Rights, they were incredible at kind of offering us specific legal advice and writing opinion letters to help us even be able to release the film. There was a lot of fear and nervousness amongst various partners and funders and supporters. Would this film create legal issues for them just for supporting us, for contributing towards the production of this film and towards the post-production? And with the Center for Constitutional Rights put a lot of energy and time and thought into exploring the legality of it, and as well as the use of communications, text messages from the FBI. But in terms of a broader campaign to address this, I think it's gradual. We have to kind of baby step our way into introducing these scenarios and this issue into American consciousness. And short of John Oliver kind of launching into it, I just don't know if we're going to get that opportunity in the near future to make a significant push against the informant program.